So welcome everybody. I'm happy to be here. I hope you are happy to be here as well. This evening we'll spend some time talking about Redux. Later on we'll talk about React. My colleague Šukys is going to present how to do it in a sort of performant manner. I will not really focus too much about performance. I'm more into the maintenance, sort of the maintenance guy, so I clean up a lot of code. And after a considerable amount of code that I've seen, I think like working with Redux can be a bit more simple than what is usually suggested. And also during this time I saw a lot of Redux codes and a lot of switches, lots of cases, lots of action types, initial states and whatnot, lots of imports, and I will try to cover everything, sort of my experience with it and how to do it, I think, in a slightly better fashion. Let's see if I have everything working. The clicker, cool, it works. So the agenda is it's not much, I think, but I will try to explain everything in detail. I will start first just by talking about what is state and what is Redux, like what do these two words mean, just so that we are all on the same page. I sort of expect a little bit of knowledge about Redux, so it's not going to be very, very beginner friendly, but I think I'm hoping you will find something useful here. Then I will just show some examples of Redux, how it's typically used, and sort of what are the ways that usually tutorials suggest, or maybe, I don't know, YouTube videos or whatever. The second step, or the third, it's about reducing boilerplates, and it's sort of like a pun, I guess, because we are going to reduce the reducer. Then I will try to show you how you can pretty much remove the boilerplate entirely and focus just on the state changes, which is pretty nice because you don't have all the things that you need to carry around when you grow your application. And lastly, I will try to talk about how to improve existing code base without rewriting everything, because that would suck. Clicker, cool. So let's start. Let's jump right into state and Redux. So two words, what do they mean? The first one is state. It has many names. Sometimes it's model, sometimes it's initial state, or just things or stuff. I like to call it model. I don't really know why. I don't think it's really important. The important thing is that usually the state is just an object. Nothing really fancy, just a plain old JavaScript object, and that's all. Redux, it's a name for a library, but I don't really know if it should be called library because it's just essentially a function with a few methods, and basically it's just a way to manage that object. That's all. It's not complicated. So let's see what the usual Redux flow is, or at least what is the expected Redux flow when you think that you have some tool to allow you to just adjust the object. And I think it should be kind of straightforward. So like you start with something. In my case, I start with just an object with one property, and I have det 0, which is great. Maybe I have some unplanned drinks, and I call a function which adjusts or updates the state, and now it's, unfortunately, the det is now 30. But then maybe someone else just pardons me, and now the det is 0. That's pretty clear and simple, nothing fancy. I'm hoping after this meetup we will not have too much debt, but well, we'll see. So this is the Redux flow. Nice and cozy, nothing fancy, but let's now look at the actual Redux flow and how it really looks like in real life. First, you don't really have any state, like you don't really have any object or anything, so you need to initialize it. You need to create store, which will inside it hold the state. So you call a function, create store, you pass. One thing that is really important is the reducer, which is a fancy name for a function that takes an object, some description of how it should change, and a new object. That's all. And then you optionally can also pass initial state and maybe some enhancers. Enhancers are usually just middlewares, but you can go crazy if you really need to. So the first step, let's look what's next. Well, we need to create an action. It's not just as calling a function. You need to do some more labor for it. Actions in Redux are, again, also just objects, but they are special in one way that they have this type property, and Redux sort of expects all actions to have this one. Then maybe you have something else coming in the same object. It's not necessarily that. It can be whatever payload you have. OK, another action just pardon, so it's similar to what I showed before. Then you also need to do the reducer thing so that it can handle one action and then the other action. So it's already a bigger list than we had before. Then you need at some point to dispatch those actions, which is basically just calling a function at a certain point in time. And finally, after, what is it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you finally have something in the state, which is what you actually want. And then it's like it doesn't really even fit on my slide. If you want more actions, it just grows, and you need more action creators, more action types if you want to split everything, and it just grows. So as I said, you have like the usual suggested way, at least what I've seen from code bases, is to have like to split action types, which are essentially just this string, but you don't usually put this as a string. You take it out, maybe even put it in another file. Then you have a problem of importing something from the file, maybe also exporting. You need to know the file path. It gets out of hand pretty quick. Also, you need not only the action type, but the action creator, which basically just returns a function with this action type. In this case, let's assume this pardon is a constant. So I already don't really like what I'm looking at because it's so much stuff. Then you probably need to take something from the state, and you can do it by either knowing the full path of some slice of the state, like all the properties and everything, or you can sort of abstract it into a function, which, given some state, will figure out how to return it. So yet another thing that you need to care about. As I said before, if you split these things, like if you have not one select that, but you have, I don't know, 20 of these, then you probably want to start splitting stuff, and then you have a lot of imports everywhere. So it's also sort of a boilerplate code. And yeah, you can just come into a place where you have too many files and you just don't really know what's going on. It's still manageable because it's Redux. It's sort of OK. But if you have many actions, many action types, like for one thing, one action, you need to carry it, like 4 things. So you want to click a button and do something with it, but instead of just clicking a button and actually doing something with it, you need to do that and also 4 other things, or maybe even more. That was quick. Let's go into and see some actual code examples. So during this talk, I will show code examples, like quite a lot of those. So hold on to your seats. It's going to be fun. Let's see how to use Redux, and my clicker should actually point here. This is just a typical code example of how Redux is usually written out. Nothing really fancy going on. Pretty much the same things that I mentioned about before. First, you create the store. So you import a function from Redux, and you have all the magic. Then the initial state or the model, whatever you call it, and I initialize it with 0, like that is 0. Then an action creator, then the reducer, which well, the switch case, I don't really like those, but this is the usual way what people do, and actually even the suggested way, I suppose. Finally, after you have all of this, you can actually call the create store function, passing it the reducer, like this one, and you can do some actions with it. So it's nothing fancy. I just show that it works, and the usual way. Clicker, slightly more complicated example, pretty much the same thing, but this time I have 2 actions. And some sort of trying to reuse some things at line 5 and 8. So these are the regular action creators. All of these are essentially returning an object, like an action for reducers to handle. Again, nothing really fancy, but I think you can already see that even for 2 actions, you need, like the code tends to grow. And I'm not even having any of the imports or selectors or anything, even the action types. So let's look at the action, like even more complicated, not really complicated, but more verbose, let's say, example. So here I'm trying to sort of follow the guidelines of how to actually do Redux the proper way, let's say, by extracting some action types into, like this, for me, it's, I don't know, it seems like I say the same thing twice. I don't really know why. Then I have the action creators where I, again, pretty much say the same thing. I don't know, it's cool, I guess. The reducer, here I'm trying to outline sort of the things that aren't really, they're not really like essential for your application. So, you know, these things grow and your application is no longer about some state and changes of the state, but about some boilerplate and how to manage it. So the initialization of the state, of the reducer, I'm sorry, the switch, the cases for each action, and for 2 is not much, but for 200 it's crazy. I'm not saying to do 200 cases in one switch case. Then this thing, default return state, actually it's pretty often forgotten, and it's really easy just to miss this and completely break your application. And then you can just scratch your head and what the hell is going on. It looks like everything is okay, but oh shoot, I forgot to return the state if no action in the switch has been caught. And so what is the essence of all of this? The essence, in my point of view, is the state and the changes of the state. And so in this case, I outlined these are 2 actions, and this is the essence, basically. All the things around are just things that you need to worry about and carry around, and you know, the more code you have, the more sort of surface area you have for bugs. So I'm not saying that you should like code golf and try to squeeze everything into one line of code. It's the opposite, like the other bad part. But the noise here, I think it can grow really fast. So let's look at some real life code examples, because I wrote these just to like showcase to outline how the structure of Redux looks like. So some real life examples of the code that I've seen. So this is just a section of action types, and this is somewhere in some files, so it's imported a bunch of times in another files. Then you can see that here in the values there's some sort of like a convention of how to write action types. And eventually these go to, like you can see these in some debuggers or whatever. They're not too useful. And again, like you create some convention, not everybody is gonna follow it. You know, it just grows, and I don't know, for me it seems sort of useless. Another example, again, a bunch of action types, and here you can see that there is slightly different sort of action types convention. Here there is this name thing, which is just a string, but it's sort of like a prefix of some slice of the state that you care about in a specific place of your app. Then we have a bunch of action creators, so-called, and these are also like pretty much repeating the same thing again and again. Okay, let's just go. An example of reducer, also a real world scenario, not the whole reducer, but just a sort of a slice of it. And here, I will show you in some next slides. I'm hoping that this is repetitive. I don't know what to say. The next thing, what's usually suggested is, as I mentioned sometime before, instead of knowing all the time what you need to take from the state, like the whole path to some property, you are sort of suggested to write what's called a selector, which essentially is just a function knowing of the shape of the state. So the first section of this code example is pretty useless in my point of view, because it doesn't do anything useful. It just takes part of the state and returns it, like no computation. These 3 paragraphs below are more useful, because this is they have an expression, so they're useful in some regard. But the first section, what is it, like 6 lines of code, is just, I don't know, kind of useless. So the imports, also a real world example. This is no code, like no logic whatsoever. It's just importing some stuff that you will later need in your component. And well, I would agree that this component maybe is too big and you can split it. But splitting components into smaller parts doesn't save you from having a lot of imports. You will still need to do the same thing. It's just going to be scattered around different files. And having many different files, well, it yields another problem, which is you have a lot of files and you might get lost at some point. Great. I'm going pretty quick, I think. So let's look at how to reduce all of this, what I showed you here. And OK, well, let's look at it later. Interjection, a small one, I'm hoping. There is sort of like a convention, or whatever you call it, to split components into, and I'm talking about React Redux components, split them into sort of two separate folders. One is the components, one is the containers. What goes inside is not really important. I'm just trying to show an example. And this reminds me of Angular times. When, like, if you start your Angular application and it's small enough, some tutorials or people suggest to do, like, put your filters in your filter folder, put your directives in a specific directives folder. And when your app grows, at some point you don't know what comes from where, and you again need a lot of dependency injection coming and going, and it just becomes a mess. Later on, after Angular, like after these nightmares in Angular, everyone just decided, hey, but it would be so much easier and more fun if we could just split folders in features. And so one folder contains everything that this feature needs. Like, not necessarily everything, of course, but if I want to know about, I don't know, sidebar, I'm just going into the sidebar folder, and here it is. I have index file, so if I'm really new to the code base, I know at least where to look, what is the entry point, and from there I can start digging inside and understand how the code looks like. And otherwise, I would need to jump around and try to figure it out. And even more, when you have these different folders everywhere and you try to change something, you need to do a lot of changes in a lot of different areas of the app. And if you are working in a team, like, merge conflicts are rather painful usually. I don't know, it's my experience, I guess. So here the important things for me would be index.js, and here I'm talking solely about, like, this outline is for React Redux components, but the idea of splitting features into folders, it's not necessarily a React Redux component. It can just be like component in a generic term, not even view of, like, not React functions or anything, but component, like, I don't know, even API calls or whatever. They lie in their own folder, and you can know everything about it in there. You can also even have tests in the same folder. It's no big deal. Okay, so coming back to the React Redux world, in this regard, for what's important for me is the index.js, like in every case, not even necessarily React or Redux. Then what's called model.js, or basically just the file where I keep stuff related to Redux. So I don't know, it can be called Redux.js, I suppose, or logic.js. I don't know. I think it's more important to have a common agreement in the team and not just follow around. Like, I said model here, so you are going to rename all your files model. It just doesn't, I don't know. And the last really important thing for me, if this component, let's say it's connected to React, then you start in index.js. And I think in here I explain a little bit more, like free sort of entry points, let's say, is index.js. So here you start if you don't know anything about a component, but at least you know where to step your first foot. And here you can also keep the Redux Connect, because usually from my experience, it's not too big of a file. It's just map state to props, map dispatch to props, and I will show you later how it looks like. Model.js, as I said, is something that keeps Redux stuff, so some state changes, maybe action types, but is everything okay? Hopefully, yeah. Okay, and the last thing is view, where it doesn't really need to be view, but just a place where you know that your view component is living in. So this should be probably just a dump component without state. So what's going, like index.js and view.js, I think it's pretty self-explanatory, but what is the model.js? Or whatever you decide to call it. The convention of, like, what we use at Wix is that we have, at least when I code Redux stuff, I always have two things in the Redux file, or model.js. Okay, I'll just call it model.js. It's going to be shorter. So I have two things. One is the name. It's just a string identifying the component name, and later on it will be used, and I will show you examples. It will be used in a create store. You will see the same name in the debugger. So it's sort of you have one place to just name your component and also name the slice of the state for this component. Another thing is the model. As I said before, the model or state or initial state, whatever, it's just an object. And the nice thing about it is that once you open the file, the model.js, you open the file and you see these two things, you immediately know what's going on. Like the shape of the state is like this. Like if you need to update it, you know where to look at. All right, cool. I think, okay, interjection is not over yet, but let's see how name is useful. And as I said, you can use it in combined reducers, which eventually passes one reducer to create store. So here you just import, or in my case, I just require the model file where I keep this name and model things. And here I just reuse it. So it's just one place to switch if I need to change it at some point, and I don't need to jump around. Another thing is if you're working with Redux, I highly suggest just to use DevTools like Debugger. I'm pretty sure most of you use it, but if you don't, here's a link. I'm pretty sure the slides will be available afterwards, so you don't, like, nobody's typing it out anyway. So this is a really good extension for Chrome. I think it's probably working on other browsers. I'm not really sure. And here, for example, if you have in this debugger, DevTools, let's call, you can see the shape of the state at some point of time. And here's how it looks like when, okay, so these blue things are the names of components. So everywhere, like somewhere I have a folder called router, and there is a name router. Somewhere I have business data, and there is a name business data. And also in actions list, you can see, like I showed one example before, where you have a bunch of action types, and you sort of suffix all the action types with the name. So this is an easy way to figure out when you have a bunch of, like a long list of actions, and you don't really know what's going on. You can, if you have this convention, if you follow it, then it's easy to track down what is coming from where. Okay, now finally the interjection is over, and let's get back to how to finally start reducing the boilerplate. First, I think since it's the easiest, let's think about selectors for a moment. And as I mentioned already, selectors are basically functions that return a slice of the state. They can also be more complex, and I'm not showcasing the more complex cases because they're unique in every application, I suppose. But what I've seen quite a lot is that people just write these selectors thinking that they're really useful, and I guess they're useful in some regard, but all they do is just return some part of the state and not doing anything else. So this grows quickly. Like if you put one more property in the state, you need to put one more function, you need to export it, maybe somewhere else to import it, so it really quickly starts to grow. What is repetitive here? I already blanked out the export const, like this block is just the same. Let's see, what else? States, like all these functions just accept the state and return something. This can be abstracted, I'm pretty sure. Okay, let's look more. States, brackets name, so the same convention of name. It's also looking the same in every function. So let's just get rid of it. Well, naming all of the selectors like this and having all these functions and coming up with names for each is, I mean, why? Like there's, I guess, a sort of agreed convention in whatever team wrote this code, but someone just decided to write like not get anymore, but select. So, I don't know, he woke up with a different mood. Let's just get rid of everything, and what do we have in the end? If we have set our model or initial model, I'll just call it model, which looks like this, like, can you see it's the same thing? So why do we need all of this? Well, the answer is we don't. We can just easily abstract it and don't have it like at all. So if, let's see exactly how to abstract it. And later on, we'll see how to abstract even more things so that we don't, like we have just black boxes and pretty much no code. So here I want to, like in the description of my talk, I sort of said that I will not show any complex concepts or big libraries or anything. I lied a little bit. I'm not going to show complex concepts. I'm not going to show big libraries, but I'm going to show a really, really small library, which is not really a library, which I called Redux MSG. Great name, thanks. It's really small. It has 6 functions in total. It's not really a library. It's sort of just utilities. And the point of my talk is not to sell you this library. You don't need to use it if you don't want to. The idea is that even spending just a little bit of time thinking about how to abstract some of the repetitive parts, you can save tremendous amount of time later on. Like this library, it exports just a small list of functions, and each of these functions are basically, like create selector, I think it's maybe 4 lines. Create reducer is 3, I think. It's really not complicated. And these things can easily live in your, somewhere like /utils folder or whatever. And if you don't want additional dependencies, you don't need to really use it. OK, so since we were talking about selectors and how to avoid the boilerplate and how to abstract some of the things, let's look at exactly this function, create selector, which is just a helper. And by following the convention of what I mentioned before, having just 2 things, name and model, name being a string, model being an object, what you can do is, OK, so first I have a model, just an object. And here I forgot, I guess, to import it somewhere, but I just believe the create selector is imported from the library. Here I call create selector with those 2 things, with name and model. And what I get in the end is something is here now. So this thing essentially is the API, or at least not maybe an API, but the shape of whatever this returns is exactly the model. So all of the selectors that I showed before now become just function calls with the same name of, as in the model. So here's my fancy animation of just pointing it out. That's nothing really fancy or anything, but already this, like from the blob of code that we had before, this just eliminated. OK, that was easy. Let's look at more complex example and talk about reducers a little bit. I don't like switches. Does anybody like switches? OK. So I don't like switches, and I think they're really repetitive. And not even that they are repetitive, but they introduce sort of places where you can just put some bugs and forget about them, or maybe don't even notice. So let's look at this reducer and what we can remove from here. OK, cases are everywhere repeated. What else? Returns, you just return everywhere. Anything else? The spread states, it just happens everywhere. What else can we remove? Oh, the default return state, which is really a place for bugs if you forget about it. Anything else? Well, of course. All of these are pretty much just mapping one action to a certain shape of state, and they just took the payload of the action and put it in the state without modifying it, without doing anything. So why do I need to repeat it? OK, and then maybe something else. Oh, yeah, this is not maybe typical for all code bases, but let's imagine that these types are something that is important from another file. And since people, I guess, are tired to import all of these separate actions, they import just types and use it like that. So let's remove it. Pretty much nothing left. OK, so at this point, I think it's enough. Now let's look how to still make this work by not having all these things around. And my clicker is not really working. So this is, again, a smaller example of the same reducer. Well, not really the same reducer, but the same way of typing reducers with switch. There are 2 actions. In here, I just hide the things, the repetitive parts from before. And I want to still make this work, as I said, but without the switches and everything. So how do I do that? Well, I can play some tricks and do something here, which, like at first glance, it's not really clear what I'm doing. But what I'm trying to achieve here is my reducer, I wish it to look like an object, and each property of this object is the action, like the action type in these brackets here. And the value of this object are sort of like tiny reducers. So instead of having pretty much just one big switch case one big switch case, I have one function call with these tiny functions inside. So this middle part, it remains the same. Like these actions, they didn't really change from before, but some things around changed. And like these things, I don't want to write these down for every reducer, so let's look at how we can abstract it. So again, I want to just get rid of these and focus only about the actual actions. So this comes, again, another useful function, which is, I think, 3 lines if I'm not mistaken, which basically just does the same piece of code that I showed you before, but you don't really see it. Let's look how it looks like. Again, the same example, crossfade, and this is how you can make your reducers look like. So first I import create reducer from my library. I don't really want to call it library because it's so tiny. Or you can import it from somewhere else. If you are interested in the source, you can go ahead and look. It's on GitHub. It's open source. So you import this abstraction. You call this abstraction. And in my case, what I do is I pass 2 things. I pass initial state, or the model, or whatever you call, like the object. And then I pass another thing, which is also an object. And the middle part here is exactly the same as it was before. So here, just outline this. This is basically the big change from before. All the actions remain the same. OK, so as I said, all the actions remain the same, but still, I would like to remove something more. I think that only these parts are really important. Like here, it's, of course, some calculations. But essentially, Redux should only care about the state changes and not even the reducer stuff. So let's take a look at how we can do that in the next section called remove boilerplate. So I reduced the reducer, I cleaned up some selectors, and I still think that it's kind of repetitive. So let's see how we can pretty much just remove boilerplate entirely. And here comes these 2 other useful functions. This makes an object. It's pretty simple. This is a function. So what do we do usually with Redux? As I mentioned before, we call an action creator, and at some point in time we pass the value of the action creator to reducer. And well, Redux handles this for us. So since I want to remove some boilerplate with reducers and everything, I sort of figured out that I can do it with a slightly more, not really advanced, but maybe more complex, let's say, action. And since this is a more complex action, a slightly more complex reducer is required to handle it. So let's look at exactly that. A bit more code that we saw before. What do I do at first? I create the store. It doesn't really matter. I import functions, create message, and create messages reducer. Then I have the same convention. This time the model is pretty small, so just to be short. And then I have this. And essentially, this is all the boilerplates I have. So my reducer is this 1 line. It's no switches, no default return state, anything. And so how do we do stuff with it now? How do we still make it work? What's important in reducer is that the signature of function is state, comma, action, and it returns a new state. So this thing right here, it does exactly the same thing. It returns a function with this signature. So this means that it can be just easily used in any of the of other Redux tools or whatever. It doesn't do too much magic inside. Now the actions that I had before inside the reducer, they're now just separate functions. And the interesting thing here is that this message thing. So it comes from here, and it's a function for which I pass another function which receives the state. And here, this action pretty much contains all you need to know about the state change. So you don't need any more like action types. You don't need action creators. You just have action. And once you have a dispatch function, like in a Redux thunk or I don't know, wherever, in map dispatch to props or something, if you have dispatch, you can dispatch this. As this eventually returns just an object. And objects, if you remember I mentioned in the beginning, are just objects that have the property type. And maybe something else, but we don't care about it. What Redux cares about it is about the property type. That's all. Yeah, so I have this message. I pass a function for it. Pretty much the same thing happens here. And whatever this function, like whatever is returned here will become the new state. So here you have the full power, the full state. Since this is an action, you can come up with things here. You don't need to wait for someone to pass a payload, because this is the place where you create the payload. And just to prove that everything is working, I have a few, I think the examples are pretty much the same from before. Just dispatch a few things and look at the state, and it's a comment, so let's believe it works. Again, pretty much the same thing, but now with less code. The same name and model thing. And to be honest, even without any of the messages or anything, the convention of name and model is pretty useful. Like if you don't even take anything from this talk, like no messages, no anything, these two things, I'm pretty sure they're useful. Again, the same thing, message and reducer, passing these two things the same way as before. And my actions with the message look like this. So if I need the state, like the previous state, I can pass a function and I get it. But if I don't need the state and I just want to update something without knowing what was before, I just pass an object. That's all. So from all of the things that we had before, now it's just one line. And here just an example of how it would have looked like with the switch. Nice animation. Click. So let's look at the same reducer that I showed before and removed all the repetitive parts, and how it would look like with all the messages. So from all of this, all of the default returns cases and everything, it would basically look like this. So, whoops. So from being many lines, of course there were some white spaces, but you can squash it. And now what's really fun is that even here you can see repetition. And like these words are pretty much the same everywhere. So you can even abstract this thing. But at this point, I just stopped abstracting anymore, because then I will just accidentally build a framework, I guess. And that's no good. I think we have too many frameworks already. So I just stopped. I have these 6 functions. If I find a way to abstract these, and I find that it's helpful for me, so why not? But I think this is good enough. Like, we removed a lot of things. Great. So let's look at the last section of my talk about improving existing code. So of course you don't want to rewrite everything now with messages or whatever I call it. It would be nice to just still have the same code base, still have the same reducers and everything, and maybe add a new way of code that is not as verbose as before. So here what comes really helpful is merge reducers, and this is really a utility function. What it does is if you have a few reducers, you can just call this function and pass the reducers to that function, and in the end it will return just one reducer. So out of many state, action, state, state, action, state, you in the end get one. So you can put it in the combined reducers and later in the create store. It's not really magic. It's like function composition, I guess. Not really, but sort of. Here's how it looks like. I import merge reducers and create messages reducer. Since in this example, I want to merge the old way of writing reducers and the new, fancy new with the messages thing. So here's the old reducer. I mark it with yellow. I don't know really why. Maybe because of the switch. And then I have this messages reducer. This is the same way as before, nothing fancy. Instead of model, I just name it here initial state. For whatever reason, it doesn't really matter. And in the end, what I do, I export the one reducer, and I just merge both of these. So what's going to happen if there is some action, like in this case, dance action, coming in for this reducer? First, this reducer will happen. It will return a new state, and then it will pass this new state to this messages reducer. So it will just sort of like waterfall, I guess. I don't know. But here, there's a small bug. Can you notice? Anyone? No one really? Are you too shy? It's pretty, I think, it's looking at you right here. Like the default return true, it's not true, it should be state. And I typed this out by accident myself. I think I wrote enough reducers during my career, and I still just blindly typed out something wrong. Of course, maybe typings or whatever would help me. I'm not using it here. It's a totally different topic, and I don't really want to touch it now. But even with these simple examples, I managed to make a bug. And with things like that, or maybe not even messages thing, but with abstracting the reducer, with create reducer, or whatever utility that you come up with, it's much better because you just don't have the surface area for new bugs. So as I mentioned at some point before, how to, like I mentioned, the map dispatch to props, map state to props. So this is the part where you connect Redux model with the React component, eventually passing stuff from state into your React components. So just an example of how you can use it. Like this is not really anything special. This is usual thing that you could do. No messages, no anything. So what do I have here? My clicker is not, okay. I import some actions, then I have map state to props, and okay, sorry. So you have the select thing, and you can choose what to select without defining each of these functions, which I think is pretty helpful. Then you have map dispatch to props, and this is really nothing special. It's what you would do in the usual case. And now let's look at if you would choose to have the messages thing. What you can do is, since your actions are now really small, and there are not too many things that are dragged around, you can have your actions just right here. Maybe it's not the best idea to have it here. Maybe you should split it, and you can easily do that, of course. But since the messages, like the actions with the messages are so small, you can easily just pass it right here, and don't drag pretty much no boilerplate code around. So I guess I would call this file index.js because I'm connecting Redux stuff with the view. So I import message and select. Maybe it can be called Selector, I don't really know. I use the select same way as before. And here in the map dispatch to props, right here I just create a function which will dispatch the new object, the new state. So if you still remember from the beginning, I showed the actual Redux flow. Now let's look how it would look like with the new Redux flow. So you create a message by following the convention of having name. You create messages reducer by having a model and also the name. And that's pretty much it. You can immediately dispatch stuff and manipulate your state, change the debts. So you no longer have any action types. You no longer have any of the action creators, which pretty much just repeat the action type. You no longer even have those simple selectors. If you need something more complicated, of course, you can have it. It's not a big deal. But you don't need to have these repetitive things. You have way less imports everywhere because your action is just one thing, not like 5. And since you don't have imports everywhere and don't have these repetitive things, you don't need that many files. So it's just so much easier to track your code and understand what's going on. Just for fun, since the Redux MSG thing is really tiny, I'm just going to show the source of it. I know the text is pretty small. You don't really need to understand anything, like all the details here. But the idea is that you don't need much code or big libraries or some complex stuff to come up with some nice ideas how to abstract the repetitive parts. So this is the create reducer. Create selector is basically a reduce function. Everything in Redux is reduced, right? Create messages reducer is slightly more complicated, but still like 10 lines of code. Create message basically just returns an object, so pretty much no logic. Well, there is a ternary operator, but not much. And merge reducers is also like 5 lines of code. If you are really interested in this and want to take a look and poke at my code, make fun of me, you can go here at argshook/reduxmsg. And if you want to see this thing in action, in the open source action, it's really not popular and pretty much no one knows about it, but inside Redux we use it. Like not this thing, but we basically use the separate parts of what we think is useful, and this is sort of just a combination of these tips. And so if you want to see more complicated examples, I have another repository, How to Redux, so you can make fun of me here as well. That's all I have for you. So thanks. What is the time? Sorry, anyone? Do I have any time for questions?
About a few minutes.
Few minutes. Okay, so Does anybody have any questions? Sure.
Why don't you import dispatch function into action creators where you can just dispatch an action instead of using map dispatch props?
You can.
Oh, I mean, in your example, you didn't. I'm guessing why.
So my examples are not the perfect, like golden thing. My intention is not to make you follow these blindly, and I don't think you ever should follow things blindly, because sometimes tutorials and even people like me are just wrong, and maybe it doesn't fit your application at all. I think the important thing is to just put things in places where it makes sense, and don't repeat everything everywhere, and maybe don't copy-paste blindly, because that's what I see quite a lot. Like you see the selectors, like a big blob of selectors. Okay, so I probably need to create a selector because this is the convention, so yeah, another one, and another one, and another, and you have 100. Yep.
So how to go about bundling the code into separate bundles? Because now, if you put all this stuff inside a certain feature folder, for example, if you're using Webpack, when you import in some feature, you would always import all the stuff here. Now, in practice, it's usual that you would like to sort of change the state, like prior actions, but you don't always need all the components, all the new components that are inside those packages. So how do you go about that?
Okay, so the question, if I understand it well, is how to bundle stuff without...
Yes, without importing all the reducers and all the components at once.
Well, if you use Webpack, I'm not sure about the details of the latest one, but it's sort of pretty much, I think, well, maybe not totally automatic, but it helps a lot. With the previous versions, you need to configure it a bit more so that you have chunks. But I don't really think it really relates to the thing that I showed.
Chunks, I mean, what chunks would do, like, it would only, you would see that you're creating a store, for example, and that you combine these reducers and stuff, and then you would most likely import all the stuff there. It would make bundles, but the size would be enormous.
Okay, so you don't necessarily have to create one combined reducers and have everything in there for the whole app. You can easily just split, like sidebar has its own combined reducers, header has its own, let's say. The body has maybe its own or maybe separate, several ones. So you don't really need to have everything in one place. You can just, without relying on Webpack chunk splitting, you can split the code yourself and do the lazy load, do whatever. We can talk maybe afterwards because I don't think it's really related to what I showed, but we can discuss.
Maybe it's not that much related to it.
Okay, anyone else? Sure.
Where do your async actions go when following this approach?
So since async actions, like the question is where my async actions go in following this convention.
Async logic, not
Async logic, yeah. Since async stuff is usually more complex, or async actions, let's say, is usually more complex than just the simple one, depending on how much logic I need to write there, I either separate it just entirely, like even a different file it could be, or if I see, like it depends. The answer is it depends. I either separate it to a separate dedicated file, or I just keep it inside the model.js, for example, or even sometimes it's like a sync action is a sync, but it's not too big to just have it in the index and write where you write map dispatched props stuff. Thank you everyone again, and have a good time tonight. Thanks.